Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 249 of Humanity Rising. I hope you all had a good weekend and that you're starting this week refreshed. On Saturday, I listened to the monthly global meditation of the Global Coherence Pulse that is sponsored by Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising. They're one of our over 350 partners. HeartMath Institute is one of the founding members, and Roland McCratty, who is the director of research at HeartMath, who's been on Humanity Rising 3 or 4 times, was saying that there's some new research that I thought would be good to share with everyone on this Monday morning. And that is, they've been doing research that if two people in love, whether they're next door or whether they're on the other side of the world, if they both center themselves on their hearts and send loving energy to each other, no matter how far apart they are physically, their hearts start to beat together. And they're discovering that when two people are sending love energy to one another, mindful of their heartbeats, that their hearts, as they beat together, begin to beat in sync with the magnetic pulse of the earth. Just imagine that. As we love, we're harmonizing with the object of our love. And it can be a child, it can be a family member, it can be a lover or a spouse, it can be a tree, it can be a cat, it can be a dog. Love just harmonizes. And when you're in harmony with the object of your love, you're in harmony with the magnetic pulsations of Mother Earth. It's comforting that 24/7, 365, the earth is just pulsing love energy. And as we harmonize with it, everyone relaxes into a oneness that heals. So let us begin our session today by just taking a moment, as we always do, centering yourself on your body, taking a few deep breaths and placing your attention on your heart. And as you do so today, just think of somebody or something that you love. And for the next minute, in a spirit of deep thanksgiving, emanate love. Thank you, everyone. Now with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you joining our session today, I would like to begin our contemplation of one of the great writers of the 20th century, Hermann Hesse, by saying that as we traverse the turbulence of our pandemic, still with us, still afflicting most of the world, in particular over the last several weeks, the subcontinent of India, also Brazil, even parts of Europe. We've cast about for how do we discern meaning? How do we come to terms with that which appears meaningless, but which, if we delve deeply into it, into that chaos, we can begin to discern a deeper order. And so we thought today that we would turn to the genius of Hermann Hesse, who we'll describe in more detail in the process of this session today, but who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1946. Very interesting that after the world had convulsed for decades in violence and war and totalitarianism, culminating in the Holocaust and in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and 50 million people dead, the first Nobel Prize for Literature was to Hermann Hesse because of the way he galvanized a sense of humanity, a sense of simple humaneness through his literature. I'll never forget age 15 when I was first introduced to Hesse. One of my teachers at the junior high school gave me Damien, and I sat riveted reading Damien, and it changed my life. It brought me alive. And I read everything that Hesse wrote in his great novels. So I'm delighted today to be able to introduce you to someone, Ludwig Max Fischer, who has written 2 books on Hesse, now writing a 3rd book on Hesse. Also has written extensively on Rainer Maria Rilke, a German poet a little bit before Hesse, and who was born in Germany, has lived most of the last period of his life here in the United States, has taught in various universities teaching mythology, communication, contemporary cultural issues, studied very deeply at Esalen and at Findhorn and at Breitenbush, where he's really examined very closely the impulse and history of the human potential movement that has such an extraordinary effect on American and European and world culture. So we invited Ludwig today to join us and help us understand the meaning of the visionary prophet that Hermann Hesse was as its relevance to our time. So Ludwig, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. And why don't we begin by you just sharing a little bit about your origins and your early life and your pathway. How did you discover Hermann Hesse with such passion that you've devoted much of your life and scholarly work to delving deeply into his genius?
Well, thank you, Jim, for this wonderful introduction. I will try to live up to it during the times. Well, how did it all start out? I was hitchhiking in the early 70s all over Europe. And my Bible was Jack Kerouac, On the Road. And I met a lot of Americans that were also hitchhiking all over Europe. And they had a different book usually in their backpack. And they always told me, well, you're reading Jack Kerouac, but you really have to read Hesse. It was that Hesse without the E at the end. And you have to read the Glassbead Game. You have to read all, Damien and Siddhartha and Steppenwolf. So that, I think, was my early introduction. I mean, when I became then a scholar of German literature, I mostly dealt with the people that left Germany, that were in exile, people like Thomas Mann and Bertolt Brecht and Leon Feuchtwanger. And for a while, I think I wasn't that deeply involved, doing work and following the path that Hermann Hesse actually shows. And it was just a different time for me. So it was later when I got a little bit tired of literary theory. I was very much involved in structuralism and formalism and positivism and, analyzing literature. But then I kind of went to the opposite side, and I thought all of these scholarly articles that I produced, of course, in order to get tenure and publish or perish, to be doing well in this particular paradigm of academia, it felt a bit limiting to me, and it felt more and more limiting. And so I wanted to explore what really a story could do for a person besides dissecting it and categorizing it. Is this early romanticism? Is this realism, expressionism, or whatever it was? Didn't feel very satisfying to me. So I went all the way to the opposite end, and I went and ran around in the woods with people like Laura Sims, and took workshops with people like Gioia Timpanelli, and I got into storytelling. So I thought there's something that really, there has to be a different way to take these stories off the page, take literature, take these words out of what Robert Bly once in a workshop that I attended said, we have to let these poems and actually these novels, we have to let them out of their cages. They are in the cages of analysis, and we need to bring them alive. And what brings them alive is something that we tell them, that we recite them, that we get into the content. So I changed very much my teaching style, and I said to my students, I'm not so much interested in what you get out of this stories of literature, but how deeply can you get into it? And in that regard, I felt what was often missing in whatever was the literature that was highly regarded by the critics at a certain time was it was a focus of the brilliance of the style. It was a kind of épaté bourgeois type of attitude in the early 20th century. But what I think was so appealing to me, and then so many other people that felt drawn to Hesse, was that direct voice, was that intimacy, that invitation to explore what is going in the heart. The third book actually that I'm working on is called The Seasons of the Heart. And it's modeled on, according to the timeless way of the Chinese dealing with the emotions, actually, as they relate actually to the whole body and to the emotional body. But anyway, what I was thinking is that if there is a writer that lets you into his own inner turmoils and how he dealt with these different issues that actually were coming to him and were throwing him out of the way of what would be a good, well-organized and very safe life. So he had to go through very deep crises, and they are well described in the biographies of Hesse. And so close that at times he had to go into psychoanalysis with an analyst that followed pretty much the work of Lang was his name, but of Carl Jung. And in fact, at times he felt he couldn't go on, and it was he thought his life had ended. You know, when Jim mentioned the Nobel Prize, you know, when the Glass Bead Game was written, it was written pretty much closely exactly to at the time of Hitler's reign over Germany. So what does it take? What kind of a soul strength, what kind of an inner source does it take if you can sustain something that you feel inside that you need to bring to the world? Because we are at the moment in a time of crisis. And that means if you are dealing with a weak connection with your deeper self, with your soul, then most people go into fear. And fear then brings out those people that are the pretenders of a fake authority. And it brings then authoritarian measures very quickly to the surface, and then people go into obedience. But I think one of the great contributions of Hesse to the world, not just to literature, but to what he can give to a person, is to develop that inner strength, to rely on connecting continuously to what I call the real CNN. And that is the cosmic natural news that we need to tune in all of the time. That is our connection that we have with the earth and the connection that we have with spirit. And two things that we have neglected in the Western mind, with its infatuation, with controlling nature, and basically getting two tools in a particular notion of progress. That means technology, manipulation through chemistry, being superior to what is going on. Now, Hesse shows a different way. He was an avid gardener. A lot of his writings are actually just attune and listen to what is going on. What are your senses telling you? And you stay with your perception, with your attention, with your concentration, with your retention of what these natural sources and those sources that come from spirit tell you at any given moment. So you stay awake with that and reduce the distractions. All that gigantic machine that we have in place that irritate our nervous system towards, well, billions of bits and bytes all the time. It makes it hard. It makes it very difficult. But I think what can center us, besides those tools, I think that have been increasingly received attention in the West, like meditation, mindfulness, and we have wonderful teachers in this area. What is still quite neglected is the great, powerful force that we have, some, like in the Irish culture with the bard as the visionary, the bard as the prophet, and the poet that holds the collective memory. And we are too deeply into, performances. It's when the story is being told, it's the story that should be remaining with the community, not how good the storyteller was. And so we have all these celebrities now that make a lot of noise. But what is the story that we anchor in a person? And I think the deepest anchoring of the connections that we all need and long for so deeply with the energies that are with us, that inform us as we are going through these biological progressions in those different seasons of life. That's the title of the second book that I just published, The Seasons of Life. That we remain open to that and we allow ourselves to be nourished by it, rather than imposing concepts of illusionary notions of progress, of dominating, manipulating everything that we encounter in the world that we cannot yet control. So I think I want to actually right away, because we are in the month of May, so I actually want to start. That's always the danger for somebody who works in the area of literature, of talking a lot about literature and spending a lot of time instead of getting into the literature. So actually, I'm going to start with a few poems that are in the book Seasons of Life that deal with poems about poetry. And here's the first one that's called The Poet. And here I'm quoting Herman. He says, I cannot sleep at night. Life hurts. When I turn words into poems, the naughty words and the proper ones, the voluptuous and the shriveled up words, I venture out into their silently mirroring ocean. Distant islands with palm trees rise into the blue. A fragrant wind blows along the shore. A child plays with colored shells on the beach. A pale white woman swims in a crystalline green. Drunken dream verses flow across my soul, like those rain showers floating over the sea, dripping with desires or frozen in mournful death. They dance, run, are lost, and stand still. Take on the garb of those all too modest words. Change forever their sound, shape, and face. Some seem ancient, yet full of momentary pleasure. Most people do not understand this. They consider me and those dreams as signs of madness. They look at me strangely, those merchants, newspaper writers, and professors. But others, children and some women, and the people watching programs from ubiquity programs, they know and love me as I love them, because they can understand this plethora of images, because the goddess bestows on them this look. So let me lead right away into a second poem, because it tells what Hesse would like you to do with his poems. And this is also in the Seasons of Life. It's called Dedication. My poems are not great art and glory. They are simple sounds in the valley of flowers, but they were born out of a warm heart. And I always sang from my soul. The happy poems did not grow out of wisdom. Each one was born from my chest. And when they were heard in the spring valley, my poems faded into the wind at sunset. if you understand what I felt as my most sacred treasure amid my desires, pain, and jest, if you can feel my young heart in these poems, then I have received the reward I longed for. So, and a third one about poem about poetry. This is called, again, The Poet. And it goes like this. Yes, I will teach you elegant verses for the wooing of women, funny fables full of flattering phrases. Yes, I will teach you the tales of fearless heroes, gracious ladies, suave swans, and evil dragons. But what rises in the night from the dark depths of your dreams abounds with grief and yearning, and what stirs each string of your soul to sing. Those are the things I will teach you to praise in silence. Well, let me follow with a little bit of prose, because I actually at this moment would like to thank a few people, because I take a different approach to poems. In terms of, I'd like to bring us through that magic of poetic language into that space of the heart that connects us to spirit and soul, and take language out of its overly pragmatized and functionalized way that we usually use it. And we miss the energy, actually, and the the blessings that a great poem, the invocation that is in a poem, in every great poem. And here I have selected then a few prose paragraphs when Hesse reflects on that process, how to poeticize language. You know, there's not enough. We talk a lot about the abuse of nature, the ecological movement as extremely and paradigm changing as it is, but there's very little talk of what we do with language. Language, our most precious connection with spirit and with the earth. You know, we forget about that in every word there is energy. And there's actually great work usually dismissed as esoteric. You know, the consonants actually are related. Where do they come from? They are actually reflecting the elements. It's a lot of work, great work done by Rudolf Steiner. You know, the R sounds is the fire energy, the sh sounds are the water energy. The ancient Chinese were very much aware of these dynamics with the healing sounds. Then you have this disciplines like eurythmy, healing rhythmy. You know, we are walking alphabet. There's a school of thinking. I took some courses in chirophonetics with a Brazilian doctor. It is, you can change your speech by massaging certain parts of your body where these letters are actually literally located and can be released. But it's all subject for other webinars. Now, but I want to just go back to Hesse so I don't fall into the trap of talking about my favorite topic actually is how can we restore our way we deal with language. Because I actually see myself as a sacred word activist. I took that from my good friend, Andrew Harvey, who wrote, he's the head of sacred activism. And he wrote actually recently a wonderful, important book called Radical Regeneration. So, and he connected me actually to Ubiquity University, for which I want to express my thanks. And quoting from this book, I really, really want to thank my co-translator, professor of English, now retired at York University, Stanley Pfefferman, who was a wonderful companion in this work. But back to a quote by Hermann Hesse. When the poet picks little words and puts them in order, selects them in the midst of a world which may be destroyed tomorrow, he does the same as the primrose and other little flowers that grow now in the meadows, in the midst of a world which tomorrow may be covered with poisonous gas. They carefully unfold their small leaves and chalices with 5, 4, or 7 petals, either smooth or jagged, everything arranged with precision and as beautiful as possible. And in response to a person, one of those scholars that criticized Hesse for, some people felt that he was too deeply into the romantic mode. And Hesse writes an answer to one of his critics: one should not read books with such thoughts and questions as you do. When you look at a flower or smell it, you do not immediately tear it apart, unless, of course, you're a scientist. I said, analyze it and place it under a microscope in order to find out why it has to look like that and smell like that. You rather let the flower speak to you and take it in with its colors and shapes, its fragrance, its whole being in its stillness and mysterious presence. You are enriched by this experience with the flower to the degree you are capable of serene adoration. Serene adoration. You could cultivate the same attitude toward the books of poets as you do with flowers. You could celebrate these poems. You could let the energy flow through you. You could feel how the vowels in a poem that are related actually to the planets, they're reflections of the planet. They're actually direct vibration of the planets. I want to just briefly here draw your attention, maybe if you have the time, to read Jocelyn Godwin's book, The Relationship Between Our Vows. Where do they come from? Those are achievements of human consciousness. So, and we just take it, we have commodified language. It's a terrible crime. And then we send huge packages, quantities, across the planet within seconds. When we have to cultivate the opposite, we have to again look into the roots of the words, the rhythms and the rhymes, celebrating the sounds, the different sounds that have been established in different languages, which reflect really actually the whole cultural history of a nation. And then we have lost with our materialistic, mechanistic attitude towards language and with our language technologies, the art of invocations, blessings and curses. When we talk about strong language, we talk about words you shouldn't say. No, our language has become weak, and we need the poets to make our language, each word, strong again. So, but another quote. Everything is waiting because I want to cultivate a little bit the energy of spring in our time here that we have together. Quote from Hesse. Everything is waiting, preparing itself. Everything dreams and germinates in a subtle, gently urging fever of becoming. The sprout yearns for the sun. The cloud longs to rain in the field. You know, this is actually poetry, but it's actually prose written as prose. The young grass strives up to the winds. Every year I lie in anxious wait, full of impatience and longing, as if a magic moment would reveal to me the miracle of new birth, as if it had to happen at once, just for 1 hour. I could co-experience and understand in a revelation the power and the beauty of how life laughingly jumps out of the earth and opens its young, big eyes towards light. Let me go to the way Hesse actually looks at the language that he uses. He says, I love the marches and dances in the syntax, the tenderness of alliterations and making music with vowels. Marches and dances in the syntax, the tenderness of alliterations, were just through the magic of the sequence of this interaction between the vowels and between the consonants and between a human voice and a human ear. I translated one of the books of Joachim Ernst Behrens. I want to draw your attention to his work, The Third Ear. We again just have to deepen our capacity to listen, because too much language just flies by. So it is, and I want to give thanks actually to another person that had a deep influence on me, the cultivator of Hesse's legacy, great legacy, and it's Volker Michels. He's a German scholar who has done unbelievable, great work to bring Hesse into the public. Now, he called Hesse's poems magic formulas with healing power. The power of language as a way to heal spirit, emotions, and heal the body. And to go one more time back to how Hesse sees verses. Verses, you know, we have to reverse a lot. That word RE is in many programs these days. Restore, rejuvenate, regenerate. We obviously have driven down a road in that speeding worldview of a particular form of progress, where we have hit a dead end, and we need to turn and restore much that we have either dismissed or ignore or neglect. But verses are, for Hesse, dance steps of the soul in that discipline of eurythmy, anthroposophical discipline. You actually make speech visible. You dance the poems, and each vowel and consonant has a specific movement. So dance steps of the soul, metaphors of longing, and magic spells. Magic spells. You know, in the Middle Ages, the art of could be used in a positive, can be used in a negative way. Curses. In the Hawaiian culture, if one of those kahuna priests cursed a person, I would die in 3 days. Mm-hmm. We really need to, again, look at the many spiritual dimensions and physical dimensions, and the power to collectively harmonize a culture through the magic of great poetry. So I would like then at this moment give you a poem. And this one is called Joy of the Painter. I want to dedicate this poem to my good friend, who's a great painter, Michał Tokarczyk. And again, you see how Hesse invokes nature and connects us in a very deep way to the natural presence. Fields yield grain, but that costs cash. Meadows are bounded by miles of wire. Scarcity and greed rule everywhere. Things seem corrupted and all walled in. Here, however, in my eyes, there lives another way of ordering things. Flowing violet and purple rule. Their songs of innocence I sing. Yellow by red are paired. Cool blue colors are tinged with pink. Color and light swing from world to world, swelling and singing in ecstasy. A spirit that heals all illness rules. Green resounds from a newborn well. Freshness and meaning spread through the world. Our hearts are delighted and filled with joy. I'd like you to draw your attention to a medical doctor by the name of Larry Dossey. Wrote some very good book about healing words. A word of love, a word speaking from the heart, a sentence, a poem. Not just quantities of texts and texting that are sent quickly across thousands of miles, but words that are given in full presence. And so therefore, I think there's actually quite a loss when modern poetry fully gave up rhyme and rhythm and such antiquated things as hexameters and pentameters. Hesse in his poetry actually constructs very much what I would call traditional poems in form, which of course is really a difficult task for a translator. But Stanley Pfefferman and I, we I would say we just did the best. We did the best we could. So a poem, a May poem, a branch in full bloom, a blossoming branch quivers in the play of the wind. My heart, too, swings like a child between bright and dark days, between wanting it all and letting go, until the blossoms are blown away and the branches hang with fruit. My childish heart won't cease to want, will not know peace, will not embrace this restless life as not in vain.
Mm.
So, well, I have maybe another favorite of mine, actually. And I have here actually the handwriting of Hesse.
Wow.
This is that old German script. And I sometimes think, because Hesse really gives you his own word imperfect. He gives you the imperfect word. What his poetry would have been if he had word perfect, but we didn't have yet. So this poem is called Happiness. It's a rather short poem, but even the first two lines I want you to reflect upon. If we had a workshop, then we probably would stop right here and break out into groups and probably spend the whole morning on this, first two lines. And they go like this. A poem has to shock you a little bit out of your conventional way of thinking. As long as you chase happiness, you're not ready to be happy. Even if you owned the best of everything. As long as you regret a loss, run after goals in restless races, you have not yet known peace. But when you have moved beyond desire, become a stranger to your aim and longing, and call no longer happiness by name, then your heart has risen above the ebb and flow of action, and peace has reached your soul.
Mm.
I'd like to read that actually one more time. Usually you'll need to read a poem several times, and I want to invite everyone that is watching these programs, whenever you meet a poem, wherever, that you read it out loud, make a certain image, a certain sound sequence, a certain line as your meditation. Don't move on from it. Stay with it. Give it presence. Give it your listening heart. As my good old friend, Brother David Stein-Rost, wrote a wonderful book. Because it's the heart that listens in a different way than the mind that wants quickly to categorize, organize, functionalize. So happiness, as long as you chase happiness, you're not ready to be happy. even if you own the best of everything, as long as you regret the loss, run after goals in restless races, you have not yet known peace. But when you have moved beyond desire, become a stranger to your aim and longing, and call no longer happiness by name, then your heart has risen above the ebb and flow of action, and peace has reached your soul. Now, this is a poem that we would, of course, in a larger context, right away connect to the Chinese influence, Tao Te Ching, I Ching, the Chinese great philosophers that have influenced Hesse, Richard Wilhelm, those German scholars, and Hesse's great influence that we have shown in Siddhartha. And I think in this context, actually, I want to give my thanks because I'm pretty much leaving out biographical information on Hesse, because Georgie Szabo has done such a great job. And in her 2 programs that I highly recommend, when she deals with Siddhartha for Humanity Rising. So I want to challenge your attention now just in a very, very small way. And that is to invite you to repeat something in a foreign language. So you get just a tiny little taste of how the originals would sound. And it's actually a great experience. I have at one point listened to Russian poems, and there you can feel how much there is in a language, in a recitation, a life experience of language beyond what's in a dictionary and in the grammar books and what can be printed. There's a deep experience to hear. So I invite you to listen to, there's plenty of it available on the internet, sometimes to poetry in another language, and don't get into identification mode, but stay with the magic of sound and the dance of the vowels and consonants. Now, the German language has a reputation of being harsh, but well, that's just because a lot of people have seen too many movies where some Nazi officers bark and abuse, actually, the beautiful German language. So this poem, Happiness, actually in German would be called Glück. Glück. What's the secret behind these Germans having these 2 umlauts, the Ü and the Ö? Does that have anything to do maybe with Turkish influence, Crusades? Could it be? You know, Turkish language is full of these 2 Ö's and U's. And what about the CH? You know, there's no JS back. That's not a component. That's not a composer. You know, the man's name is Johann Sebastian Bach. So you have the CH sound. What does that mean in an invocation? So Glück, but back to Glück, and I ask for you for a moment to put aside your urge to, I don't understand this, what is this? No, just to stay with the sound. And I will just give you the first 3 lines and the last 3 lines. So lang, that's again, the L sound is very different in German. It's much more in the front, L. Chinese medicine, that connects actually the governing vessels, you know, when you put your tongue right behind your upper teeth, there are actually energetic movements happening in different languages that invoke different physical energies and ultimately actually invoke different spiritual forces. So, solange du nach dem Glücke jagst, bist du nicht reif zum Glücklichsein und wäre alles Liebste dein. Now, you know, you get the rhyme, right? And the last two lines are, dann reicht dir des Geschehens Flut nicht mehr ans Herz und deine Seele ruht. I need to give you right now a poem that is sort of the ultimate, the pearl of pearls, called by Thomas Mann, and it's actually by Eichendorff. You've never heard of Eichendorff, but read him right away. And the end of a poem called Moonlight goes like this. And my soul spread wide its wings, was flying through the stillen land as if flying towards home. Und meine Seele spannte weit ihre Flügel aus, flog durch die stillen Lande, als flöge sie nach Haus. So this is really, I would say, the essence of Hesse's concern and aim, that he gives you back some wings to your soul, that you can fly to your own inner center, that you get the energy, that you get the wings to then act to the world, because it's not some kind of a selfish individualism that he is advocating. No, only that person who is in touch, who is able to contact that core of himself or herself, is then able to make a contribution, because this person is not, tumbling in between in fear and in rage between the different ideologies offered to them and these different organizations that want your immediate loyalty and obedience. It is as soon as you have that inner self strengthened is when you're able to give back to the community something valuable. I think maybe it would be now the time to, I do want to mention two more things. That Hesse got into being a painter, and these are some of the paintings. I just selected one. He lived in Montagnola for then most of his later life. And actually, I'm maybe doing a journey with my friend Rolf White, who is the founder of Open Center in New York, in June of 2023, to the places where Hesse lived and where Rilke lived. And because there is an earlier Esalen, can you see Hermann Hesse here? He was for a while at Monte Verita. Monte Verita was an Esalen at 1900, where there were workshops about living more of a spiritual life and more a life closer to nature, rather than getting swept away by the technological agenda that was producing then the airplanes and the machine guns in World War I. So Jim, anything at this point that you would like me to respond to, or any comments? And because I have lots more poem from this book, The Seasons of Life, or the earlier book that received a lot of positive reflections, The Seasons of the Soul. And
So you seem to be entranced by his poetry, and in turn, you've entranced us with the cadence and the melody. It's a powerful point that you're making, Ludwig, about the importance of language. I was just reflecting while you were talking that it was in 1946, actually, when George Orwell published his masterwork, 1984. And in that book, the party ultimately controlled through language, and both the simultaneous impoverishment of language by design and the limitation of language, but also the repetition of language over and over. So it's striking that Hesse was revitalizing language right at the moment when George Orwell saw that the culture and the governing elites were seeking to maximize control through the manipulation and the impoverishment of language. And I think what you've provided for a few minutes today is how language, both in translation in English, but also in the original German, can revitalize the soul. It's not only something that's intellectual, it's something that deeply penetrates the psyche and the heart when language is a living thing. And I would imagine that's the source of your attraction to Rilke, the power of his poetry.
Well, Rilke is the Western Rumi. And I'm very excited about the place that Rumi takes now in many people's spiritual journey, because we have great wisdom. And again, my friend Andrew Harvey also brought a lot of attention to Kabir. And we have these cultures that we have devalued and dismissed. And well, Rilke is the ultimate magician. I mean, he really puts you in a different state of consciousness.
Totally.
And I do see actually just fractions of some sentences. And, a great poem puts us into a trance, but there is a positive trance, a spiritual trance, which is related to connecting to the inner enlightened being in each one of us. But then there is a very powerful trance that I only can tell you if I listen to Hitler speaking or Joseph Goebbels, shivers run down my spine. It is, but unfortunately, there are some of these speakers today, actually even some of those fundamentalist preachers, that if you look at their gestures and the melodies and the rhythms, there are some very, very unfortunate similarities that, if you're linguistically sensitive, that are very, very scary, because you literally can take a whole culture of highly evolved intellectuals, contemporary of Hitler's, Albert Einstein. People live at the same time, and you can deactivate the intelligence of a nation that needs to go then into exile or be killed or be, survive maybe, in a concentration camp. This is, so language is a very, very great instrument, but also an incredibly dangerous tool when it's abused. And I've seen it recently in some of the speeches of prominent people on television. I've seen it abused quite a bit. So what will protect you from that? I think that if you work on your own sensitivity to what comes to you as words and what you express in words to other people, and slow this down and deepen this, then the spiritual nature and the organic and the energetic gifts that nature can give to you and should really be part of your enriched life. It will make you immune. It will definitely increase your immunity towards hate speech and towards populist speech that somebody somehow is able to take some gut feeling dissatisfaction in many people and then turn it into being the champion of frustrated hopes by playing to them many people, the vulnerable masses, as the rescuer and savior that only his, or it could be hers, great authority with authoritarian rule will save a nature, a nation, or a culture. So,
well, I think,
yeah.
well, I think you're
Jim,
making a very profound point that I think is worth pausing and dwelling on for a moment. The striking similarities between Germany in the 1920s and say the United States in the 1920s, and the rise of fascism in that time, and the rise of Trumpism, say in the United States, but with Orbán in Hungary and Bolsonaro in Brazil, Modi, Xi Jinping, we're seeing around the world the rise of the same kind of authoritarianism and totalitarianism through political instrumentalities, but also through social media and the manipulation of false news. I mean, one of the things that George Orwell pointed out was that the Ministry of Truth in 1984, its prime job was to falsify the news. Because if you could falsify news, you destabilize people's confidence in reality. And once their confidence in reality is destabilized, they have no moorings. And then they're more easily manipulated. And I think the point that you're making, Ludwig, is really profound. And I just wanted to dwell on it for a moment, that it is by reading Hesse, by reading his poetry, by reading Damien and Steppenwolf and Narcissus and Goldman and the Glass Bead Game and Rilke and living great thinkers and writers of our time, that our sensibilities to truth are heightened. And your point that it acts as an immune enhancement to almost our being, our physiology, that it protects us from the falsification that is happening with this Philistine impulse that is being used by the demagogues and the authoritarians around the world. So I think that being a sacred word activist is a powerful point, because every day on Humanity Rising, we are exchanging words. So you've really re-quickened my sensitivity to the sacredness of language today. So say more about sacred word activism. That's very, very powerful notion.
We have to restore the sacred word. The power of blessings, the power of prayer, of course, is related here. And the science, for example, that you have in the traditional Indian culture of mantra, that really deepens the connection with spirit. So all of that we have not completely, but to a large degree, sacrificed in our Western modern mind towards efficiency. So we transport quantities. René Guénon talks about the reign of quantity. We have sacrificed what Robert Bly called, there's something vertical in a great poem. There's a vertical dimension. I remember him talking in a workshop I attended with Marion Woodman, was a good old friend of mine who moved on. Now, that verticalness, the vertical characteristics of nature, of language, it connects to spirit and it connects to the energy of the earth. So when I invite people basically to go on a poetic high, by the way, preferably without any other chemical substances, then I don't want the people to think about that I'm inviting sort of, according to the 1960, that you never come down from that high. Do you think you get now a permanent state of bliss? It is just actually a very necessary connection, because poets, the great poets, and I would say probably even the poem that the average person forms and spends time with, is really an opening from the established categories, from the stagnation of language because language words wear out. And to form a new word, to form a new metaphor, to form a new symbol, it takes decades sometimes for a poet. And that's a gift to the whole society, because then society can think again in a different term, in a different way. And that is the opening to a transition to another way of looking at the world, because that world is then filled with new symbols, with new metaphors. So we very much depend as a society on the poets to open the words again and protect them from the abuse of, those who just functionalize every word according to its pragmatic efficiencies. That wears out the words, because language is it's more like a living organism. It needs to be nourished so it can nourish us. So I want you to come down from that poetic high after you have attained it by reading a great poem, because actually it will infuse your own critical thinking, your rational thinking, with information, actually with messages. That word information is a very, we live in the age of dataism. A New York journalist called it, give me the data. There's no such thing as data. Sorry to tell you that. Data is a frozen perception that longs to be transformed into a word. And the word longs to be transformed into a living presence of something that we feel with our heart, with our soul, reflects what is happening in our spirit. So, we have to look again at the roots of a word. Very interesting, actually, to study etymology. That brings you in touch again where this word comes from. Osho used to use that very extensively. I did spend some time, I lived in Oregon at the ranch, Manycountries. He had a very slow way of speaking. And yet it transformed the whole hall of, 3,000 people listening to him. It wasn't that big scream of today's most public speakers and a lot of the preachers. So if you again evoke, an evocation is bringing up the energy from the earth, and an invocation, which actually means you bring the messages down from the cosmos, from spirit, then you use every word as if you were growing a tree. And if you're just to text, you end up only with the log, not with the tree. That's why when you start your computer, you log in. And you lost the tree. So try to reclaim the tree in every word that you use.
Thank you.
Because that's what poetry is about. So what is the general feeling again? Because I only have about 200 poems left. So,
well, it's time for us to bring this session to a close, but why don't you either select a poem or reread the poem on happiness was a very powerful poem. You could read that again as we close. Do you have it in German?
Yes, I gave you 5 lines from it, but I could give you the whole thing if you, whatever you like. Would you like to have it in?
Kurt had requested that you read the happiness poem in German.
The whole thing in German? Okay. But I want to strike a deal with you that those of you, and it won't be easy, who do not know German, that take it as a sound bath.
Yes, a sound bath. Beautiful.
And it has many wonderful floral essences and essential oils in it that enjoy it. And you don't have to analyze the H2O that is in that water. So stay with the sound bath. So here it is again in German. Actually, the whole poem, which is only less than 12 lines. Solang du nach dem Glücke jagst, bist du nicht reif zum Glücklichsein. Und wäre alles Liebste dein. Solang du Verlorenes klagst und Ziele hast und rastlos bist, weißt du noch nicht, was Friede ist. Erst wenn du jedem Wunsch entsagst, nicht Ziel mehr noch Begehren kennst, das Glück nicht mehr mit Namen nennst, dann reicht dir des Geschehens Flut nicht mehr ans Herz und deine Seele ruht.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think calls to mind, the great opening verse of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yes.
And nothing was created except through the Word.
And the word has become flesh. What does that mean? I once took a 3-week seminar on this sentence with an anthroposophist, an arche and hologos, because that could be looked at in the beginning. That means in the origin. It could be also translated as the origin of the world is sound. The world is sound is a book by Joachim Ernst Behrens. So we have to look, actually, the sound is something energy creating as something that is then later on moved into the formation of what we call the alphabet. And the alphabet in different languages and different alphabets, which again in their form reflects something very deep. When you look at Tibetan, at that script, it's like all the letters hang down from the sky. It's reflecting the spiritual nature of that culture. You know, so I have a good friend by the name of Vimala Rogers that wrote a book, Change Your Handwriting, Change Your Life. And that is a fascinating approach where you can literally, as one of the ways of personal growth and spiritual growth, because your handwriting does reflect in a very deep way who you are. And of course, we dismiss that as not part of Western science, like so many other things, that's graphology. But I once went with a friend to a party and there was somebody there, and you know, I was way superior at that time in my early academic phase. That there couldn't be anything to that, it's graphology. And so this was an older man, and I said, just write a line. My friend wrote a line, and the man said, "Oh, you got hit on the head when you were 4 years old." Well, it's right here. Can you see it in this letter? So, you know, they have this many holistic sciences in different cultures, like astrology, palmistry, and have deep traditions as tools, as ecological tools, actually holistic tools and instruments to see who we are as reflections of much more than what is allowed in that small reductionistic cage of Western thinking, as we have put it as a doctrine to the human mind in the last 300 years.
Well, Ludwig, I hope we can have you back just doing a session on language. I would love to.
Session. I think it would take at least 25. I spent 40 years of that. You know, it's a treasure. It's one of those treasures that I hope there are other people tell me that there's more happening in that area, what I would call the sacred word, or the ecological approach. I wrote some academic articles on the ecology of language. There is a discipline called ecolinguistics, which, what is lost? We're losing a language every week. We only have 6,000 left. So anyway, yeah, well, I do that. Whatever you want, I'll be there. Jim,
well, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from a sacred word activist today who brought alive Hesse at a time when we need this kind of re-quickening of language in a world of fake news. And we'll have Ludwig back down the trail to go more deeply into the originating power of language and how we can bring our whole beings more in tune with the larger whole by just renewing our relationship with language. This is very, very powerful, Ludwig, today. So thank you for this contemplation of Hesse.
It is my pleasure.
Did it so powerfully. And I've put into the chat Ludwig's course. He's going to do a 4-week webinar in October. And we just uploaded the course today. So you can sign up for it. He'll be going into Hesse on the soul, self, and society in times of crisis. And we'll be bringing that to your attention closer to the time, but just wanted to note it today. So thank you, Ludwig, for that. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to continue with this meta theme of empowering our innate capacities. How do we continue to activate our own human potential from the outside in at a moment when from the outside in we are being pressed as never before, not only through language, but through the pandemic and through politics. So we need a mechanism for requickening ourselves from the inside out. And that is the theme we're going to be covering tomorrow. So that'll be same time, same station here on Humanity Rising. Ludwig, thank you for today. It's been very powerful and inspiring, and we look forward to having you back.
It has been a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you, Jim, and everybody else who is at Ubiquity University, because I'm very proud that I was able to participate in that fantastic work that you're doing. So I'm looking forward for another time when we share some of the sacredness and the practical applications of true language, true news.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you here again tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.